right, so welcome to this episode of Check This Out. I am Susan. I'm the manager at the Upper King William branch.
And I am Kathleen. I work here with Susan.
All right, so this episode is going to be dedicated to our favorite thing, books, our favorite books, the books that we've read in the past, what we've enjoyed about them. So I think I want to begin this episode by asking a fundamental question. I am part of a book club, and I have to say I never actually considered this question before. Why do I read? I just always knew that I did.
Why do you read, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, well, I tend to pick books that nobody else likes in the book club. They're usually nonfiction or historical in nature. And we were having a discussion one time, and one of the people in my book club was saying, well, it's just that when you pick something, you always have to learn something from the book. And, it was like, it was a moment for me because she was right. I mean, I do have to learn something when I read. So if I had to answer a question, why do I read? To me, the main answer would be in order to learn something.
Well, there are a lot of reasons that people read or want to read or love reading.
Yes.
To be inspired.
Yes.
And I know you do that.
Absolutely.
For pleasure.
Yes.
Mental stimulation.
Yes.
Knowledge and enhancement.
Yes.
And I think it increases your vocabulary expression.
Yes.
It can improve your state of mind, and studies show that it can improve your memory as well.
Well, I have doubts about that one, considering myself, but okay, yes, I'll go with that.
Well, one thing for sure, it will improve your focus and concentration if you're going to settle on a book.
Yes.
And
so a source of entertainment as well.
A free source of entertainment.
Free source of entertainment, especially if you have a library card.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, I think all of those are true. And the reason why I wanted to start with this question is because, whatever answer that is for you personally, why do you read? It's going to affect whether you like a book, whether you dislike a book. And I wanted to preface this discussion by putting that out there as an explanation of why these are the books that we personally prefer. I want to emphasize that we're not saying that we think these books are so-called better than others overall. We're not here to judge any type of book that people enjoy reading. Is perfectly okay by us. It's just, our perspective and what we think, makes a good book, or the books that we have loved to read, throughout our lives.
Okay, well, so shall we start with fiction?
Yes, let's go into that. So, you know me, I'm not usually a great friend to fiction. I prefer nonfiction most of the time, but every once in a while I do find a fiction book that I really, really love.
Well, fiction can help you understand other people's perspective. Yeah. It has a magic ability to pull you into the story to where all of a sudden it's not fictional to you.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was looking up on the internet, why do people read? And it was in the Harvard Business Review, done in 2020. And it's a case for reading fiction by Christine Seifert.
I love that.
And I just thought it was kind of interesting. It just mentioned a couple of people, such as, Warren Buffett. He said he spends most of his day reading and recommends reading 500 pages a day.
Wow, okay, that's ambitious.
My big goal is 50 pages a day, and that's the biggest goal I've ever set for myself.
I love that you have a goal, though, because I'm so bad at it. Some days I don't get a chance to read much of anything.
Well, I try. And this year is the first year I've really set a goal for reading. Entrepreneur Mark Cuban says he reads more than 3 hours a day.
Wow.
And Elon Musk says he learned to build rockets by reading books.
That is actually a really good point to make, because And that's what I'm saying about learning something. It's like it opens you up to a new world. And even fiction, like you're saying, it opens you up to another perspective, which I think is definitely true. Like I read a lot of historical fiction, but it helps me kind of fill in the gaps. I mean, historical documents can only tell you so much. I love kind of seeing what an author thinks a historical character might have felt in a certain time. And I think that does kind of add to the learning aspect of historical characters as well.
I love how you say fill in the gaps.
Yes.
Would you consider Clan of the Cave Bears historical fiction?
I think it's a wide breadth historical fiction.
Well, there's
I'm
a lot
not-
of fill in the gaps
Yeah.
there, but it's fun.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It can be fun. I think, to go back to that original question of why do you read, entertainment and learning, to me, those go hand in hand. And so it doesn't mean you're having to learn about things you might not, necessarily care for. I mean, learning something can just make you, consider something that you never had before and kind of open up your mind to things. So.
Right, because it's just, I'm curious about a lot of things, and
Yes.
it could be a lot of different subjects that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
And that's why, one of the reasons I love reading. So if we start with fiction, I mean, I have a list of, 100 books that I'd say are my favorites. So should we start with what some of the books we love?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, I'm going to have someone to listen to this and say, what about that book? What about that book? What about... You're right. I mean, I probably, every day that you ask me what my favorite book is, I'd give you a different answer because there's so many of them that are good. So these are just some
Yes.
of the books that we love. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's do classics.
Okay.
I know you love classics.
I love classics. Okay, well, I'll just name 3 right off the bat that I love a lot and that I've read several times. David Copperfield, Charles Dickens. Love that book. And Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte. I kind of read that book every 10 years.
Wow.
And I've changed my perspective on it. It's really interesting.
That's
like
a cool
as a
thing to
young
do.
girl and then now as an older woman. It's a different, I feel differently about the characters.
Yeah.
And The Good Earth, Pearl S. Buck. I just love that book.
That's awesome.
China. Okay.
My classics,
a couple.
I don't read as many classics as you do.
I'm older.
More
time.
I'll get to them eventually. That's what I say.
Yes.
My favorite books that are classics would be Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath.
Love it.
Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And I read this when I was younger, I mean in my early teenage years. And I can't say I picked up on all of the nuance. Kind of like you said, if you read them as you're older, your perspective does change a bit. I was always fascinated with the concept of justice and how some people do not have access to the same level of justice as others. And I just always appreciated how those two authors could weave a story, because both of them are fiction, and yet they were paralleling the lives of so many different people, and they're classics because, well, I don't know, sadly, or fortunately, I'm not sure which one you're going with, you can still find a way to see a parallel between what they were explaining. These books took place in the 1930s and the early 1900s, and you can still see how relevant they are today. And I think you could kind of go back in time and say the same thing. The story in itself doesn't really change much. So I love that about them.
Okay, I'm going to hop around a bit.
Yeah.
One that I just loved, it's another Steinbeck, East of Eden. Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. That's
gosh.
just so beautiful. I've listened to it on audio and I've read it, I think, twice.
I know, I
Just love
have
it.
to read that one.
It's-
You know how I am about the
yes.
Russians. I love their literature, but wow.
Yes, it's a big one.
Editing
But
was an idea then. I don't know.
It's good. And then I see kids even coming in today to the library
Yeah.
to check out Watership Down
Yep.
by Richard Adams. And that's a book that surprised me a little bit because it's a story told through the eyes of rabbits. And I just thought it was just an incredible, fascinating, and exciting book.
Yes, very good. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, fiction is fantastic when done well. It's great. I mean, I have moving on from the classics to more contemporary authors, Madeleine Miller's The Song of Achilles was so fantastic. It was phenomenal. The way that she writes, I've described it to you before, it's lyrical to me. She then wrote Circe, which I didn't get into it as easily as I did with The Song of Achilles. But then by the end, I thought, phenomenal. Just a wonderful, wonderful contemporary author.
But would you say there was a touch of mythology in it?
Yes, absolutely.
And did you read mythology
I did.
as a child?
I did, yeah.
Or I should say younger years.
Yes, and that's another thing about filling in the gaps, because, mythology is just kind of the basic story. I mean, even Homer's epics, it's telling you what happened, or what he says happened. And Madeleine Miller is kind of filling in the gaps from, of course, a contemporary point of view. She's looking at this, and I love that, because mythology is telling you a lot about what the people of that era believed to be important, their values, and so it's kind of bringing it full circle. And still, I mean, to me, it's historical in nature, but
And they're partly origin stories.
yes, yeah,
Which are beautiful.
yeah.
Let's see, more contemporary. Well, I read The Goldfinch, which you thought should have been edited down about 300 pages.
That's another one.
That's by
Yeah.
Donna Tartt. I just saw, if I see an interview with an author and
Yeah.
it sounds exciting, I think I'll do it. But once again, I'm the type of reader that I don't mind if it's long.
Yeah.
And I don't mind if it's lots of description. I'll tackle a big book.
Well, usually I'm not like, me, I don't care for books that are too long, and I do believe in editing. But I mean, and I don't focus as much on the language as you do. I know you love descriptions, because it makes you feel like you're part of the story, and you get a greater feel of the story. The Western Wind, which was a book that moved very slowly, and I thought I would hate it, because I don't usually like books like that. I'm a very plot-driven type of individual, and this was I thought it was fantastic. The author managed to, I think, put herself in the position of someone who was living in, 14th century England?
Well, it was the plague. Was it the plague years?
Yeah, so maybe, 14th century. So, I mean, the ability to do that and do it convincingly and make it entertaining at the same time, I thought was a wonderful feat. So another one that I loved.
And you stumbled across that book because you were searching for some books about that time period,
Yes,
if I
'cause
recall.
there were not that many. There
Right.
are not that many. It is not necessarily a popular time period to write about, because it is so far removed, or we think it's so far removed from the contemporary time period. So it is difficult to create characters and have them behave believingly for a historical author, yeah.
And I read Hamnet, which is
Yes.
about that period as well. Some more contemporary fiction. A Gentleman in Moscow. Amor Tells. I really like that, and I'm looking forward to his next book, which is, it's out, The Lincoln Highway.
Yes.
Nelson DeMille, I don't usually read him, but
Yeah,
The Gold Coast, I really like that one. And for Westerns, I loved Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry.
Well, I mean, I think that's, those are definitely some really good authors that you're mentioning. And as we move into nonfiction, that is a totally different game for us. I mean, I know for sure you have a varied kind of subject choice when it comes to nonfiction.
Well, I have lots of subject choices.
Yes.
Yes. So whatever you're interested in with nonfiction,
Yeah.
it's out there.
Yeah, there's a book for it, and that's the great thing. Of course, I tend to gear towards history, but I also love, kind of like you, philosophy, spirituality, books like that.
And I like books on the environment.
Yes.
And biographies can really just be so eye-opening.
Yeah. And some nonfiction authors are better than others. I do admit that. Some nonfiction books are a little bit harder to get through, and some authors can piece together a narrative even within nonfiction, which I'm very impressed when I read a nonfiction book and I thought this was so well written. I always say well researched is one thing. Well written, well constructed is something completely different.
Well, that's what makes it worth reading.
Yes.
If it's good.
Yes, absolutely.
So with travel, there was this charming little book that I love. I love it. It's called Shanti Boat.
Okay.
And it was written by Harlan Hubbard. And I think it was written in the 30s and 40s.
Okay.
And he built a little shanty boat with his wife, and they went down the Mississippi. And it's just fascinating how they bartered and traded along the way and lived in this, talk about tiny houses. This is just a little bitty boat. And that is nonfiction, and it was just very, very entertaining to me.
Well, that's a great story, actually.
And then a completely unusual book about travel is Underland by Robert Mcfarland.
You told me about that one.
Oh, going under the earth in caves, and it was just the weirdest book, but wonderful and well written, and gave me the creeps, though I had a little bit of claustrophobia.
Anxiety a little bit from it. That's the same thing as fiction, though, because you're going into a different world that you never even knew existed. Because when you told me about that, I didn't even realize half of those things were a real thing. You would think that they would be fiction. That's how amazing they are. But that's the great thing about nonfiction. And sometimes I'll start reading a fiction book and then want to read a nonfiction book about the time period.
I love that.
Just to learn more. So we could go on and on and on and on and on and on about nonfiction. I mean, we really could, because we both read a lot of it.
Well, for philosophy, I do like philosophy, and I can go from a spiritual philosophy. I've always been intrigued with Buddhism.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Braiding Sweetgrass, which came out not too long ago by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a botanist and a professor and Native American, and she wrote the most beautiful book. It's basically indigenous wisdom mixed with scientific knowledge, mixed with the teachings of plants.
Wow.
And it's a very slow read, but reading it calmed me down, and I just thought it was so beautiful.
Yeah. I just had a patron tell me they really wanted to read that, so
That
sounds interesting.
That's getting around. It's a beautiful book. And then a long time ago, I read a book by David Suzuki, which I became fascinated with, and it was called The Sacred Balance, and it's sort of rediscovering our place in nature. And I do tend to read books about nature and the environment.
I think that goes along with philosophy and spirituality too, though. Those are usually tied together in some way when you're reading them. Yeah, so I mean, we've got nonfiction. I mean, I don't know if I read as much nonfiction as a child. I think I mainly stuck to fiction when I was a child. So let's move on to our favorite childhood books.
Okay.
I know you got a long list, Kathleen.
No, I really don't. I came from a big family, and we were turned free at the public library on a weekly basis.
Turned loose.
And I used to just grab lots of books, and I wish so much I had kept track of my favorites. So things that pop out, of course, are Little Women, which everyone read.
Except me. I never
Except
read
you.
Little
Oh, you
And
should.
now I can't go back
Right.
and read it as an adult because I'll never have the child's perspective from it. I
Right.
missed out.
Everyone reads it and identifies with one of the characters. I won't tell you which one I did.
Okay, all right.
But,
We'll keep that a mystery. Next episode.
There was one unusual book, though, called Carbonell, the King of Cats.
Tell me the background again on that.
Well, first of all, this was written in 1955 by Barbara Slay. And it's about a magic cat and a magic broom, and this is before Harry Potter. And she's from England.
Yeah.
So I often wonder if J.K. Rowling was influenced by this author.
Probably. I mean, you know what? It's hard for an author to not have someone, I think, influence them. You have to get the ideas from somewhere. Something had to have inspired you, especially with, I always think about that. Like, Game of Thrones is similar. Like, you're creating an entirely new universe of characters. But I mean, George R.R. Martin has talked about the fact that he's had, influences, historical influences as well. Because there's just, there's no other way of, you have to have an influence by something. So maybe we can ask her one day.
That would be my question that I'd want to ask her. Maybe someday I will write, to J.K. Rowling and ask.
Tweet her.
Have you ever heard of Carbonell, the king of cats?
Well, and here I go again. My favorite book series when I was a kid, and I loved series when I was a kid. Interestingly enough, as an adult, I don't like them as much. I love the Magic Treehouse series by Mary Pope Osborne, the Time Warp Trio, and a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. So a lot of the time travel ones, they're going back in time to different historical time periods, which is, again, what I loved about it. Even back then, I loved history. And actually, the same reason why I loved the Time Warp Trio and Magic Treehouse is the same reason why I read Outlander as an adult. The concept of a contemporary person traveling back in time to a particular time period just always fascinated me. I think it's because I wanted to travel back in time to find all these answers to different questions that we still have. And a series of unfortunate events, it's as unfortunate as it sounds. But I found it entertaining how the kids would always find a way to get out of a situation. Like, they use their intelligence, or they would always invent something to get out of harm's way. So I really appreciated that. And then the way that Lemony Snicket wrote felt very adult to me at the time. And now looking back as an adult, is like he was including a lot of adult themes into his book. So yeah, I really, really like those.
Were you read aloud to as a child?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Okay.
What about you?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Maybe that was the beginning of it. I used to love, we used to have library time at school, and our teacher a librarian, would always choose a book to read aloud to us.
Daily?
I don't even remember how often we would go on trips to the library, but weekly, I think, at least.
I loved that.
Yeah.
I loved that.
That's so cool. All right, so we move on to what book has surprised you?
That you thought you wouldn't like and then like?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's see. I think one book that really surprised me was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Yeah, that's really popular now too. I still see people checking that out.
That was an audiobook I listened to.
Okay.
And it just, it's back in the beginning of video games. And I thought, I'm not going to enjoy this. But
Because you don't play video games, right?
No.
You
but
never did?
My kids did.
So did you ever, did you read it thinking you might want to see what your kids are into, or why your kids are into something, or you just thought
this
it was
is past in the beginning of video games. I'm talking about when they just came out, and it just reminded me of that time.
Gotcha.
That was pretty good. And then, of course, the latest book I read that surprised me, I didn't think I'd like. It was for a book group called The Code Breaker. Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing and the Future of the Human Race. And I thought, and it was by Walter Isaacson, very much about science, and that was not my strong suit, and yet I found it so fascinating. I was up at night. There's so many things that made me think about. So that was a shocker.
Well, for me, I mean, the great thing about working in a library is that we get to see a lot of the new books that come out. So one day I was doing transit, that's checking new books in that have come in for us, and I saw a book called Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And I usually look at the spine because I want to know what genre it is. And it was fantasy. And I thought, oh, no way. No. I don't do fantasy. And so I thought, I'm not going to like this. But I still flipped the cover and I looked at the plot of the book. And I saw that it was about Mexican folklore. And I was actually impressed because we don't see a lot of books regarding that subject, especially fiction books about that. So I thought, you know what, let me give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? I'll just check it out, check it back in. And I loved it. She did such a good job. My thing with fantasy, because I have read other books that are fantasy before that I have liked, just not a lot of them, is if an author can have a story that is absolutely unbelievable. If I told you on paper, this is what the story is about, you're like, no, I would never buy into that. If an author can take a story like that and make you genuinely believe that these characters are going through this and it's perfectly normal, that is the sign of a great book to me, and a great author who can kind of weave together a story and make it seem plausible to you, because she's done it so well and kind of prepped it so well.
Well, it does surprise me that you said you liked a fantasy book.
You might not hear that for a while. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the great thing about books. And kind of like you said, I mean, if you have free access to entertainment, especially if you have a library card, you don't lose a lot by trying a new book. And that is why I decided to join a book club. I thought that it would be a good thing to kind of introduce me to stories about books and the different books that my friends were reading. And my favorite component, though, is talking about books. That's my favorite thing.
It helps to understand it more.
Yes.
And sometimes you may not enjoy it as much, but other members of the group would talk about it, and you think, well, okay, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. I use my fellow book club members to rail against a lot of books, and you guys have to hear it from me too.
And we do have a book club here at the library,
yes,
for anyone interested in joining.
Yes. Yeah, and that's really cool. I mean, I encourage people, if they're kind of on the fence about joining a book club, then, I would say so. But,
well, I just wanted to ask if there was ever a book that you read that had a profound effect on you.
Yes, absolutely. So, we're talking about nonfiction earlier, and philosophy. I was working at the Mechanicsville Library at the time. I was an assistant there. And I saw a book called The Book of Joy. And it was a book written by the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I thought, oh no, here's another self-help book. Another book that's going to tell you if you do these 4 steps, you're going to have the perfect life and you're always going to be happy. And I thought, it got good reviews though. So I figured, okay, might as well just give it a shot. And so I did. And Kathleen, that book, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, it changed my life.
Wow.
It did. It took my life into a completely different trajectory. I think I was always kind of searching for, without being too melodramatic, a meaning for life.
For joy.
Yes, for joy. And the concept that one could live for joy was just intriguing, and it genuinely changed how I thought about my own thought process. And, having always dealt with anxiety in my life, it really helped put me into a different spiritual path and philosophical path.
Wow, well, that's uplifting. Mine's more of a downer. A book that really affected me was called The Long Emergency by Kunstler was the last name. And that was really just made me wake up and kind of realize, looking at the world in a broader view, and of course it's just one man's view, but it's just more about, dwindling resources and all those depressing things. But it just kind of woke me up and made me look at things a little differently.
Yeah, because you read a lot of books like that now.
Oh, I do.
Yeah. So, it's put you on the path.
Dwindling resources. Okay,
Yeah.
so what book do you want to read, and then we'll wrap it up.
What book do I want to read? Well, I want to read Tolstoy's books.
Okay.
Now, I know I will do it, Kathleen. I promise I will.
Okay.
Someday.
Do you have a stack on your nightstand or whatever that
Oh,
you
of
want to get
course.
to?
You know, well, we work in the library. I mean,
That's
we
right.
have
We have stacks everywhere.
of books, and then we see others, and we keep adding to the
Yes,
stack and the
yes.
stack and the stack.
To read,
so
to read.
It's infinite. It's infinite. Really, the list is infinite. What about you?
Well, on my nightstand is Dope Sick by
Oh, yes.
Beth Macy. I want to read that about the opioid crisis.
You'll enjoy it. Well, actually, enjoy is the wrong word.
Yeah.
It'll infuriate you, but
That's right.
It's a good book.
And then I told you the Lincoln Highway,
Yes.
Immortals, and I am listening to the book Chasing History by Carl Bernstein.
So that's another one. What are you reading now?
Oh, Chasing History.
So that's the only one?
No, The Maid by Nita. Let's see, what I forget what her name is. But I'm reading The Maid.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reading a book club book.
Okay.
It's called Blind Tiger by Sandra Brown.
It doesn't sound like you.
Well, you know, it goes back to that question of why do you read? I feel always like I need to learn something, or it needs to open my mind to a different idea that I might not have considered before. And unfortunately, this book just isn't doing it for me. It's just, I feel like there's a lot going on and there's not as much character development as there could be. I feel like they could be really interesting characters if she delved a little deeper. But I feel like it's a little bit surface level.
So this is the challenge of being in a book group. So
Yes.
do you finish it or do you not finish it?
Oh,
You know?
this one I think I will. I have quit before,
Okay.
but this one I think it's not quite as bad as I'm making it sound. It's not bad. It just doesn't challenge me in any way.
Okay.
So, yep.
You can stop reading it then.
That's the only one I'm reading right now. But you know what? That's the great thing about books, you know. They always lead you on a journey to somewhere. Like, I'm sure I have faith that there's one thing about this book that I'm going to find interesting, and it's going to lead me to my next book. I just know it.
Okay. Well,
All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. Come by the Upper King William Library. We've
Yes.
always got interesting things to chat about. Any
Yes.
book recommendations? We'd love to hear what you're reading right now.
that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So again, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. Come by the library anytime, get yourself a library card, and then you can have access to all of these fun books and way more. We have a lot of stuff.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
All right.